In the cold, sterile silence of a gleaming courtroom, a pregnant woman sat with her hands laced over her swollen belly, her heart a leaden drum against her ribs. Across the aisle, her husband's mistress, a vision in crimson, smirked from the witness stand. The air was thick with lies, betrayal, and the venom in her eyes as she mocked the very existence of the unborn child. She thought she was untouchable, that her victory was assured. But she didn't account for the judge, a woman who had seen everything and whose gaze missed nothing. In the moments that followed, the gavel would remain silent. But a single question, quiet and precise, would detonate the truth and change all of their lives forever. Charlotte Pierce believed in the architecture of a perfect life. She had built hers meticulously, brick by brick, alongside her husband, Dominic. Their brownstone in a leafy suburb of Boston was a testament to their success. A 4-story masterpiece of restored wood, gleaming brass, and floor-to-ceiling windows that drank in the afternoon light. It was featured in magazines. Their life was, by all accounts, a feature story. Dominic was a rising star in investment banking, his ambition a sharp, magnetic force that had first drawn her in. Charlotte, a talented art curator, had put her own career on a gentle simmer to orchestrate their world. A world of charity galas, tasteful renovations, and a love that seemed as solid as the century-old oak in their backyard. Now at 34, she was adding the final, most cherished piece to their collection. A child. At 6 months pregnant, she carried the weight of her future, a gentle, constant reminder of the life they were creating. She would often sit in the half-finished nursery, the scent of fresh, low VOC paint in the air, her hands tracing the outline of a hand-painted mural of whimsical forest creatures. This was it, the culmination of everything she had ever wanted. The first crack in the foundation was almost imperceptible, a hairline fracture you could easily ignore. It was a Tuesday. Dominic came home late, smelling not of the city's stale air and take-out coffee, but of jasmine and something sharp, like expensive gin. "Tough day, honey?" she asked, rising to greet him, her body feeling heavy and slow. "Brutal," he sighed, kissing her forehead. The kiss felt sterile, a gesture performed out of habit, not affection. "Had to entertain some clients from Singapore. You know how it is." She did. Or she thought she did. But the Dominic who entertained clients usually came home energized, full of stories about the deal, the restaurant, the ridiculous demands. This Dominic was hollowed out, his eyes avoiding hers as he loosened his tie. Later, while doing the laundry, she found a receipt in his suit pocket. It was from a bar she'd never heard of, the Onyx Lounge, time-stamped at 11:45 p.m. 2 drinks, a midnight bloom, gin cocktail, and a single malt scotch. Odd for a client meeting that was supposedly a large dinner. She told herself she was being hormonal, the pregnancy making her paranoid. She threw the receipt away, but the name of the cocktail, so floral and feminine, snagged in her mind. A week later, another crack. He was in the shower when his phone, lying face up on the bedside table, buzzed. A message from a ZR popped up on the lock screen. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." Charlotte's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Zia. Who was Zia? Ah. She stood frozen, the words burning into her memory. She could confront him. She could scream, throw the phone, shatter the perfect facade. But what if she was wrong? What if it was a misunderstanding? The fear of being wrong was eclipsed only by the terrifying certainty that she was right. When he emerged from the bathroom, steam curling around his broad shoulders, he saw her staring at the phone. He didn't flinch. He simply picked it up, glanced at the screen, and slid it into his pocket with unnerving calm. "Work stuff," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced lie. "This new analyst is a little too eager." He called the analyst he. Charlotte didn't challenge him. Instead, a cold, unfamiliar resolve began to crystallize within her. The woman who curated art, who understood the value of authenticity and the story behind the canvas, knew a forgery when she saw one. Her perfect life was a forgery. The gaslighting became an art form. When she questioned his late nights, he accused her of being clingy and insecure. "Lottie, you need to trust me. This pressure you're putting on me, it's not good for us. It's not good for the baby." When she mentioned feeling distant from him, he blamed her pregnancy hormones. "You're just emotional right now, sweetheart. It's understandable." He made her feel like she was the one losing her grip, the one jeopardizing their perfect world with her unfounded suspicions. The final, shattering blow came a month before her due date. Dominic was supposedly on a business trip to Chicago. He called her every night, his voice filled with a convincing, hollow ache of being away from her. On the second night, she was having trouble sleeping and decided to use their shared tablet to read. She opened the web browser, and the last page Dominic had visited was still open. It wasn't a financial report or a hotel booking. It was the website for a high-end jewelry store. And in the search history, a single item, the Auden locket, rose gold. It wasn't for her. Her birthday had passed months ago. Their anniversary was in the spring, and Christmas was a distant thought. This was a gift for someone else. A secret gift. On a whim, driven by a desperate, sickening curiosity, she opened their shared photo cloud. She rarely used it, but Dominic was meticulous about backing everything up. She scrolled past years of smiling vacation photos, holiday gatherings, and pictures of their home. And then she saw it. A folder he had created, carelessly named Weekend. It was an album from 2 months prior. The weekend he was supposedly at a banking conference in Miami. There he was, smiling on a boat, the sun glinting off his sunglasses. And beside him, her arm wrapped possessively around his waist, was a woman. She was stunning in a way that felt aggressive. Sharp cheekbones, raven hair cut in a severe bob, and eyes that smoldered with defiant confidence. She was wearing a bikini that showcased a lean, hard-won body. In one photo she was laughing, head thrown back, a midnight bloom cocktail in her hand. In another, she was kissing Dominic's neck, her red lipstick a stark brand against his skin. Charlotte's world didn't just crack, it imploded. Every lie, every sterile kiss, every late night snapped into focus. The woman was Zidar. The jasmine perfume. The locket. It was all for her, as Charlotte sat there, the cold blue light of the tablet illuminating her tear-streaked face. She felt the baby kick. A small, innocent life caught in the wreckage of a devastating lie. The gilded cage had broken, and she was finally, terrifyingly, free. The days that followed were a blur of managed grief. Charlotte moved through her beautiful, empty house like a ghost, the silence amplifying the roaring in her ears. She performed the rituals of her life, attending her prenatal appointments, overseeing the final touches on the nursery, answering concerned calls from friends, with a chilling detachment. She was an actress playing the part of the happy, expectant mother, while inside she was methodically dismantling the set. She knew she needed more than a folder of photos. Dominic was a master of manipulation. He would twist the narrative, claim it was a momentary lapse, a mistake he deeply regretted. He would weaponize her pregnancy, her emotions, and their shared history against her. She needed irrefutable proof, a weapon of her own. She needed a professional. Frank Miller was not the kind of man you found in the glossy directories of Boston's elite. His office was a small third-floor walk-up over a bakery in a less fashionable part of town, smelling faintly of old coffee and cynicism. He was a former cop in his late 50s, with a rumpled suit and eyes that had seen the worst of human nature and were no longer surprised by any of it. Charlotte, sitting opposite him in a worn leather chair, felt utterly out of place. She explained her situation in a low, steady voice, presenting the facts without the tears that constantly threatened to overwhelm her. Frank listened patiently, his expression unreadable. "He's careful," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. "He thinks he's smarter than everyone." "They all do, Mrs. Pierce," Frank said, his voice a gravelly baritone. "That's their biggest mistake." For the next 2 weeks, Frank became her shadow, an unseen ally in a war she was fighting alone. He was discreet, efficient, and worth every penny of the considerable fee she paid him from a private account she'd maintained since before her marriage. The report arrived not in a manila envelope, but as a password-protected digital file. Frank advised her to view it on a secure computer away from her home network. She drove to a public library, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, and opened the file in a secluded cubicle. It was worse than she could have ever imagined. Frank hadn't just confirmed the affair, he had documented its entire architecture. There were photos of Dominic and the woman, whose name the report confirmed was Zoe Reynolds, a senior marketing director at a rival firm, entering a sleek, modern apartment building in the Seaport district. An apartment, Frank's research revealed, that was leased under Zoe's name, but for which the payments were being automatically transferred from an offshore account Dominic had set up years ago. There were restaurant bills, credit card statements, linking them to trips she knew nothing about, a ski weekend in Aspen, a wine-tasting tour in Napa. He had built a second, parallel life, funded by the wealth Charlotte had helped him build. The report detailed Zoe's background: ambitious, divorced, known in her professional circle for being ruthless. She was the antithesis of Charlotte, sharp where Charlotte was soft, cynical where Charlotte was hopeful. The final piece of evidence was a short video clip, filmed with a long lens camera from across the street. It showed Dominic and Zoe on the balcony of her apartment. He was holding her, whispering in her ear. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He opened it, and even from a distance, Charlotte could see the glint of rose gold. It was the Auden locket. He fastened it around Zoe's neck. It was an act of intimacy so profound, so devastating, that it felt like a physical blow. He had given this other woman a symbol of love and permanence, while his pregnant wife slept alone in their bed. That night, when Dominic came home from his business trip, Charlotte was waiting for him in the living room. The tablet was on the coffee table, open to the photo album. He stopped in the doorway, his briefcase slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers. For the first time since she had known him, the smooth mask of Dominic Pierce fell away, revealing the panicked, cornered man beneath. "Lottie," he began, his voice hoarse. "Don't," she said, her own voice dangerously calm. "Don't you dare call me that. Her name is Zoe Reynolds. You bought her an apartment with our money. You took her to Napa, to Aspen. You gave her a locket last night. A rose gold locket." The color drained from his face. He sank onto the ottoman, his head in his hands. The confession, when it came, was a pathetic torrent of excuses. He was stressed. The pressure at work was immense. He felt neglected. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. The words were meaningless static. "You said you were in Chicago," she said, the simple statement landing with the force of a final judgment. "I know. Lottie, I swear it's over," he pleaded, his eyes swimming with tears she now knew were performative. "I will end it tonight. We can fix this. For the baby. For us." He was still lying. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught. The man she had loved, the man whose child she was carrying, was a stranger. A con artist who had sold her a beautiful, empty dream. "There is no us, Dominic," she said, standing up, the movement slow and deliberate. "There is me, and there is this baby, and we are leaving." Packing was an act of surgical precision. She took only what was hers, her clothes, her books, her personal art collection. She left behind the furniture they had chosen together, the kitchen appliances they had received as wedding gifts, the life they had curated. As she walked through the nursery for the last time, her hand caressed the mural of the sleeping fox. A tear finally escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She was not just leaving a house. She was leaving the future she had so carefully painted. But as she closed the front door behind her, the heavy click of the lock sounded less like an ending and more like the beginning of a battle. The first meeting with Diana Albright felt like taking a breath of clean, sharp air after drowning in a swamp of deceit. Diana's office was the opposite of Frank Miller's. It was on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper, with a panoramic view of the Boston Harbor. The space was minimalist, decorated in cool tones of gray and white, exuding an aura of calm, unshakable competence. Diana herself was in her late 40s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe but elegant chignon. Her eyes were intelligent, missing nothing, and when Charlotte told her story, they filled not with pity, but with a focused, righteous anger. Charlotte, what you have experienced is not just infidelity. It's a calculated pattern of financial and emotional fraud, Diana stated, her voice even and firm. She reviewed Frank Miller's report, her expression hardening with each page. The offshore account, the apartment, the gifts, these are marital assets he has actively concealed and diverted. This isn't just a divorce, it's a financial recovery operation. For the first time since discovering the weekend folder, Charlotte felt a flicker of strength. With Diana by her side, she wasn't just a victim. She was a plaintiff. The divorce papers were filed. Dominic, as predicted, did not go quietly. He hired Robert Keene, a notoriously aggressive lawyer known for his scorched earth tactics. Keene's strategy became immediately clear: to paint Charlotte as an unstable, vindictive, and financially irresponsible woman, undeserving of the settlement she was entitled to. The first volley of legal documents was an assault on her character. They claimed her decision to leave the marital home was an act of emotional instability brought on by pregnancy hormones, a danger to her own well-being. They audited her spending for the past 5 years, twisting every purchase into an act of frivolity. The money she spent on charity galas was framed as social climbing, her investments in art as reckless expenditures, and her work on their home as vanity projects. They're trying to bleed you dry, emotionally and financially, Diana warned, her face grim as they reviewed the documents. They want you to get tired, to get scared, and to accept a lowball offer to make it all go away. We won't let that happen. The stress was immense. Charlotte, now living in a rented condo that felt sterile and temporary, spent her days buried in paperwork, documenting every penny she had contributed to their life together. The nights were the worst. Alone in an unfamiliar bed, the baby's movements were a constant, bittersweet reminder of what she was fighting for. Her doctor warned her about her rising blood pressure, urging her to avoid stress, an impossible request. She felt as though she were fighting a war on 2 fronts, one for her child's future security, and another for her own sanity. Dominic, meanwhile, played the part of the heartbroken husband to their friends and family. He spun a tale of a wife who had become distant and irrationally jealous, who had abandoned him in his time of need. Some friends, swayed by his practiced charm, offered Charlotte their condolences as if she were the one who had erred. The isolation was suffocating. Keene's tactics escalated. He filed a motion to have Charlotte undergo a psychiatric evaluation, citing her erratic behavior. "This is a classic Keene move," Diana said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He's trying to build a record of instability to use against you in a custody fight later. He's not just trying to protect Dominic's money. He's trying to take your child." That was the moment Charlotte's fear transformed into cold, hard fury. They could attack her character, question her spending, and try to break her spirit, but they would not touch her child. "Fight him, Diana," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "Fight them with everything you have." Diana smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "That's what I was waiting to hear." They fought back. Diana's team filed a counter-motion for a full forensic audit of Dominic's finances, including the offshore accounts. They subpoenaed records from his firm, the travel agencies, the jewelry stores. They began to build a mountain of evidence that exposed not a heartbroken husband, but a methodical liar who had spent years siphoning marital assets to fund his secret life. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer a simple divorce case. It was a war over truth, money, and the future of an unborn child. And as the preliminary hearings were set, Charlotte knew that the fight was about to move from paper to person, and that she would soon have to face not only her husband, but the woman who had helped him destroy her world. Zoe Reynolds was not content to remain a name on a legal document or a face in a photograph. She was, as Charlotte quickly learned, a woman who thrived in the spotlight, even one as sordid as this. As the legal battle intensified, Zoe began to emerge from the shadows, her presence a calculated campaign of psychological warfare. It started subtly. Charlotte was having lunch with one of the few friends who had unequivocally taken her side, a gallery owner named Sarah. They were at a quiet cafe, a place Charlotte had always loved for its privacy. Halfway through their meal, a familiar laugh, sharp and loud, cut through the quiet murmur of the room. Charlotte looked up and saw her. Zoe was at a table near the entrance, holding court with two other women. She was dressed in a striking cobalt blue suit, her posture impeccable, her crimson lipstick a slash of defiance. She saw Charlotte, and her eyes, for a fleeting moment, locked with hers. There was no shame, no flicker of remorse. There was only a cool, appraising look, followed by a slow, deliberate smirk. She then turned back to her friends, her laughter even louder than before. It was a clear message. I am not hiding. This is my city now. A week later, it happened again. Charlotte was at a high-end baby boutique, the same one where she had registered months ago in another lifetime. She was picking up a few essentials when she heard a voice behind her, dripping with saccharine sweetness. Oh, what a precious little outfit. Is it for a boy or a girl? Charlotte turned. It was Zoe, holding a ridiculously expensive cashmere baby blanket. She was feigning innocence, her eyes wide, but the malice was palpable. I'm sorry, do I know you? Charlotte asked, her voice colder than she expected. Zoe's smile widened. I don't think so. I'm just admiring your taste. My friend is expecting, and I'm completely clueless about these things. One has to be so careful about what one brings into the world, don't you think? The veiled insult hung in the air between them. Charlotte's hand instinctively went to her stomach. She felt a surge of protective rage, so intense it made her dizzy. She simply turned her back on Zoe, walked to the counter, paid for her items, and left without another word. She would not give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction, but as she walked down the street, she could feel Zoe's eyes on her back, a physical weight of judgment and mockery. Dominic, when confronted by Diana's office about Zoe's behavior, claimed he had no control over her. She's her own person. I can't tell her where she can and can't go, was his official, hollow response. He's not trying to stop her because he's enjoying this, Diana surmised during a late-night strategy call. Every time she unnerves you, they see it as a win. They believe they are demonstrating his new, powerful life, while you are relegated to the past. They're trying to establish a narrative that his life with her is the primary one, and you are a temporary, unfortunate obligation. The campaign escalated. Zoe began appearing in the background of paparazzi photos of Dominic leaving his office, a silent, supportive partner. She was seen driving his car. There was a rumor, artfully leaked to a local gossip columnist, that they were looking at property together, a clear signal that they were building a future on the ashes of his marriage. The most brazen act came 2 weeks before the main court hearing. Charlotte received a package by courier. Inside was a small, elegant box from the very same jewelry store where Dominic had bought the locket. Her heart seized, thinking it was some twisted attempt at an apology from him. But it wasn't. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single perfect rose gold charm, a tiny stylized letter, Zedit. There was no note. None was needed. It was an act of pure, unadulterated cruelty, a trophy from her conquest. It was Zoe's way of saying, I have what you thought was yours. I have the jewelry, I have the man, and I am not afraid of you. Charlotte didn't cry. She took the box, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it into the garbage disposal. She turned the switch, and the angry, grinding roar of the machine shredding the metal was the most satisfying sound she had heard in months. It was then that she understood her opponent. Zoe wasn't just a mistress. She was a predator who enjoyed the hunt and the kill. She believed she had already won and was now merely toying with her prey. This arrogance, Charlotte realized, was not just her greatest weapon, it was also her greatest weakness. And as she and Diana prepared for court, they began to build their strategy around that very flaw. Zoe wanted to be seen. She wanted to testify. She wanted her moment to gloat, and they were going to give it to her. The Honorable Margaret Wallace presided over Family Courtroom 4B. She was a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being sharp, fair, and possessing a near supernatural ability to detect falsehood. Her courtroom was her kingdom, and she ran it with an air of quiet authority that could make the most seasoned lawyers tremble. Today, the air in 4B was particularly frigid. Charlotte sat beside Diana, her posture straight, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her belly. She wore a simple, navy blue maternity dress, a stark contrast to the spectacle across the aisle. Dominic sat beside Robert Keane, looking pale and tense, his expensive suit doing little to hide his discomfort. But all eyes were on the woman seated behind him. Zoe Reynolds had dressed for war. She was in a tailored blood-red dress that hugged her frame, her dark hair sleek, her makeup flawless. She looked like she had walked off a magazine cover and into a small claims dispute. She met Charlotte's gaze with a look of undisguised triumph, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. She was not a witness. She was a victor, taking her place on the dais. The morning was a tedious but brutal slog through financial disclosures. Keane, Dominic's lawyer, did his best to portray Dominic as a generous man being taken advantage of. He presented evidence of the lifestyle Charlotte had enjoyed, framing the marital home, the vacations, and her art collection as extravagant gifts from a doting husband, not shared assets she had helped build. Diana, in her cross-examinations, was a master of quiet devastation. With methodical precision, she introduced evidence of Dominic's hidden accounts, his undeclared bonuses, and the vast sums of money funneled into his life with Zoe. For every dollar spent on a gift for Charlotte, Diana presented $2 spent on a secret ski trip or a lease on a luxury car for his mistress. The narrative began to shift. Dominic was no longer the victim. He was a financial predator. Then, after the lunch recess, Keane made a move that was both bold and incredibly foolish. The defense calls Zoe Reynolds to the stand. A murmur went through the small gallery. Calling the mistress to testify was a high-risk gamble. It could either paint the husband as a man who had found true happiness after escaping a miserable marriage, or it could backfire spectacularly, showcasing his stunning lack of judgment. Keane was betting on the former. He was betting on Zoe's charisma and confidence to win over the judge. Zoe walked to the stand with the confidence of a CEO striding into a boardroom. She swore the oath, her voice clear and steady, and settled into the chair as if it were a throne. Keane began his questioning, his tone gentle and solicitous. "Ms. Reynolds, could you please describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Pierce?" "Dominic and I have a deep and meaningful connection," Zoe began, her eyes flicking towards Dominic with practiced adoration. "We found each other at a time when he was feeling incredibly isolated and alone." "Isolated? Alone?" "But he was married," Keane prompted. "He was," Zoe said, her voice laced with a theatrical sadness. "But a house is not a home. He was in a partnership that lacked support, passion. He was providing a wonderful life, but he was receiving very little in return emotionally. She was good. She was very, very good. She painted a picture of Dominic as a lonely, misunderstood man, and Charlotte as a cold, materialistic wife who was more interested in art auctions than in her husband's emotional needs. She spoke of their shared interests, their late-night talks, their plans for the future. "And what are those plans?" Keane asked. "To build a life together, a real partnership based on mutual respect and love," Zoe said, her gaze drifting over to Charlotte, a sliver of ice in her eyes. Diana objected sporadically, on grounds of speculation or hearsay, but for the most part, she let Zoe talk. She watched her, letting her build her own stage, letting her confidence swell into pure, unadulterated arrogance. The real show began when Diana stood up for her cross-examination. She approached the stand slowly, her expression calm, almost serene. "Ms. Reynolds, you've painted a very romantic picture of your relationship with Mr. Pierce," Diana began, her voice soft. "You claim it's built on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect." "That's correct," Zoe said, lifting her chin defiantly. "So, you respected him while he was actively lying to his pregnant wife every single day?" "I respected the man he was struggling to be." "He was trapped," Zoe snapped back, her composure cracking for the first time. "Trapped," Diana repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "An interesting choice of words. Let's talk about the apartment in the Seaport district. The one you live in. Who pays the rent?" "I do," Zoe said quickly. A little too quickly. "Really? Because our forensic accountant has traced every single payment for that lease for the past 18 months directly to an offshore entity owned and controlled by Mr. Pierce." an entity his wife had no knowledge of. Were you aware you were living in an apartment paid for with stolen marital funds? Zoe flushed. Dominic handles some of my financial planning. It's complicated. I'm sure it is, Diana said dryly. And the trips, the gifts, the Auden locket, were those also part of this complicated financial plan? Keene shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness. Ms. Albright, your point is made. Move on, Judge Wallace said, her eyes fixed on Zoe. Diana nodded. She had established the financial deception. Now it was time for the character assassination, the one Zoe had been invited to perform herself. She let the silence stretch for a beat before delivering the final, crucial sequence of questions. Diana Albright took a step back from the witness box, creating a theatrical space between herself and Zoe. Her tone shifted from prosecutorial to something quieter, more conversational, which was infinitely more dangerous. Miss Reynolds, you stated earlier that Mr. Pierce felt trapped, and you've made several allusions to his unhappiness in the marriage. Let's be clear. Are you suggesting that his wife, Mrs. Pierce, is the sole reason for that unhappiness? Zoe leaned forward, seeing her opening. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to deliver the killing blow in front of everyone. Her eyes, filled with contempt, slid over to Charlotte, deliberately lingering on her pregnant stomach. Dominic is a good man, a generous man, Zoe began, her voice dripping with condescending pity. He wanted a partner, an equal, not a dependent. He felt the walls closing in long before that. She made a subtle, dismissive gesture towards Charlotte's abdomen. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. It was a shockingly cruel and direct attack. Robert Keene shifted uncomfortably. Even Dominic had the decency to look down at his hands. Zoe wasn't finished. She pressed her advantage, her voice rising with righteous indignation. Some women, she said, now looking directly at Charlotte, will do anything to trap a man. A career, a house, even a baby. They see it as the ultimate insurance policy. The mockery was breathtaking in its cruelty. She wasn't just a mistress. She was an executioner, publicly shaming a pregnant woman she had wronged. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Diana placed a calming hand on her arm, a silent command to stay strong. Diana turned to the judge. Objection, Your Honor. The witness is speculating and making slanderous, inflammatory statements. I'll allow it, Judge Wallace said, her voice unexpectedly calm. Her face was an unreadable mask, but her eyes, like chips of granite, were narrowed, focused intently on Zoe. She was giving her all the rope she needed. Zoe smirked, believing the judge was on her side. She had won. She had publicly declared Charlotte a gold-digging broodmare and had gotten away with it. Her victory seemed absolute. Diana Albright let the vile words hang in the poisoned air for a long moment. She didn't look at Zoe. Instead, she addressed the judge. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness. Keene looked relieved. It was over. Zoe had delivered her soundbite, and they could move on. Zoe herself looked triumphant as she prepared to step down. "Miss Reynolds, you may remain seated," Judge Wallace said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a shard of glass. Zoe froze, her confident smile faltering. Lawyers for both sides looked up, surprised. It was unusual for a judge to intervene so directly. Judge Wallace removed her glasses and placed them on the dais. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto Zoe with an intensity that made the witness physically recoil. All the feigned warmth was gone, replaced by a gaze of pure, distilled power. "Miss Reynolds," the judge began, her voice dangerously soft. "You've spoken at great length about Mr. Pierce's future, his character, and what you believe he was trapped by. You present yourself as the architect of his new life, a life you claim is based on honesty." Zoe swallowed, nodding mutely. "Yes, Your Honor. It's clear you've been planning this new life with Mr. Pierce for some time. You seem to have everything worked out." The judge paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then she asked the question. It wasn't about the affair, the money, or the lies. It was simple, specific, and utterly devastating. "Ms. Reynolds, could you please state for the court the exact closing date for the property you and Mr. Pierce put an offer on last Tuesday in the Hamptons?" The world stopped. For a moment, there was only a stunned, ringing silence. The question was a laser-guided missile. It wasn't a guess. It was a fact that no one in the room, except for the judge, seemed to possess. Zoe Reynolds's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority just seconds before, completely crumbled. The color drained away, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. Her crimson lips parted, but no sound came out. Her mind was visibly racing, searching for an escape that didn't exist. If she said she didn't know, she would look like a fool, proving her talk of a shared future was a lie. If she admitted it, she would be confessing, under oath, to actively helping Dominic dissipate significant marital assets, a beachfront property no less, during an active divorce proceeding. It was proof of premeditated financial fraud on a massive scale. It was a confession to conspiracy. Robert Keene was on his feet, his face a mask of horror. "Your Honor, I object. Where is this information coming from? This is completely out of order." Judge Wallace didn't even glance at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the unraveling witness. "Overruled, Mr. Keene. Sit down. Your witness has made multiple claims about her intimate knowledge of Mr. Pierce's life and future plans. This is a simple, clarifying question." "Ms. Reynolds, the court is waiting," Zoe stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. I don't recall the exact date." "You don't recall?" the judge pressed, her voice turning to ice. "An hour ago, you were testifying with perfect clarity about conversations you had with Mr. Pierce 18 months ago. But you don't recall the closing date of a multi-million-dollar home you were set to purchase in less than a month. A home, I might add, for which the 10% down payment was wired yesterday morning from that same offshore account you claimed was for financial planning. It was over. The judge didn't just have a question, she had the wire transfer receipt. She had the sales agreement. She had it all. Zoe had walked into a trap she couldn't see, one laid not by Diana Albright, but by the silent, observant woman on the bench. Zoe finally broke. She looked at Dominic, her eyes wide with panic and betrayal, but he was staring at the floor, his face ashen. He was a ruined man. We, she sputtered, before dissolving into a pathetic silence. Judge Wallace put her glasses back on. The verdict was already written in her eyes. "Thank you, Miss Reynolds. That will be all." The mistress, who had entered the courtroom like a queen, stumbled from the witness stand like a common criminal, her mockery and arrogance reduced to nothing by a single, perfectly aimed question. The explosion from Judge Wallace's question created a vacuum in the courtroom, sucking all the air and arrogance out of the room. As she called for an immediate recess, the silence was shattered by the frantic scraping of chairs and the urgent whispers of lawyers. The hallway outside courtroom 4B became a makeshift war room for the losing side. Charlotte, guided by Diana's steady hand on her elbow, watched from a distance. She saw Robert Keane, his face a mask of purple fury, corner Dominic against a wall, hissing words that were sharp enough to be heard even from 30 feet away. Dominic, who had always stood so tall, seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But the true spectacle was Zoe. She stood alone, a pariah in her blood-red dress, her phone pressed to her ear as she frantically tried to reach someone, her own lawyer, perhaps, who could not or would not answer. Her carefully constructed facade of untouchable confidence had been sandblasted away, revealing the panicked, grasping woman beneath. She caught Charlotte's eye, and for a fleeting moment her expression was not one of hatred, but of raw, pleading terror. She had gambled everything on a man who was a liar, and in the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the courthouse, she was finally realizing she had lost more than just a legal argument. "Don't watch them," Diana said softly, steering Charlotte toward a quiet alcove by a window. "They aren't worth the energy. Let's just breathe." Charlotte leaned against the cool glass, looking down at the city below. The cars moved like tiny, orderly insects, oblivious to the life-altering drama taking place on the 4th floor. For months, she had been carrying a weight so heavy it had felt like a physical part of her. Now, for the first time, she felt it begin to lift. It wasn't joy she felt, or even triumph. It was something far more profound, the quiet, steady return of gravity, of solid ground beneath her feet. "She knew," Charlotte whispered, more to herself than to Diana. "The judge, she knew about the house the whole time." "Good judges listen to everything, Charlotte," Diana replied, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips. "But great judges listen to what isn't being said." Judge Wallace saw Zoe's arrogance for what it was, a cover for a massive lie. She just waited for the perfect moment to pull the thread. When they were called back into the courtroom an hour later, the atmosphere had transformed. The air of legalistic debate was gone, replaced by the solemnity of a sentencing. Dominic and Zoe sat far apart now, their alliance irrevocably broken. Robert Keane looked haggard and defeated. Judge Wallace entered, and took her seat, her face etched with a stern resolve. She put on her glasses and looked down at the documents before her, though it was clear she needed no notes. Her gaze swept over Dominic and Zoe, pinning them in place with sheer force of will. "In my 20 years on this bench," she began, her voice resonating with a cold, clear authority that filled every corner of the room, "I have rarely witnessed such a brazen, calculated, and contemptuous attempt to defraud a spouse in this court. The matter before us was a petition for the dissolution of a marriage. What it became, through the actions of Mr. Pierce and the active, enthusiastic participation of Miss Reynolds, was a masterclass in deception." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The lies told were not merely personal betrayals. They were financial crimes, meticulously planned and executed. Funds were hidden, assets were diverted, and a secret life was built with the fruits of a marital partnership. "But what this court finds most repugnant," she continued, her eyes now locking onto Zoe, "is the sheer cruelty displayed on the witness stand today. Ms. Reynolds, you were not content to simply benefit from your affair. You sought to humiliate and degrade a woman carrying the very child your partner helped create. You mocked her pregnancy, calling it an insurance policy, while you yourself were attempting to secure a multi-million-dollar asset paid for with stolen money. The irony would be laughable if the malice were not so profound." Judge Wallace then turned her unsparing gaze to Dominic. "And you, Mr. Pierce, you stood by and allowed this to happen. You financed this entire charade of a life, believing you were above scrutiny, above the law, and certainly above the decency owed to the woman who is the mother of your unborn child. The judgment, when she delivered it, was swift and absolute. It was a complete annihilation of Dominic's legal position. Charlotte was awarded 70% of all documented marital assets. This included the full, liquidated value of every dollar in the offshore account and the immediate forfeiture of the 10% down payment on the Hamptons property. The Boston brownstone, the home Charlotte had poured her heart into, was declared her sole and separate property, free of any claim from him. As a final measure, the judge ordered Dominic to pay for every cent of Charlotte's considerable legal fees, and then set a child support figure that was based not on his now diminished income, but on his proven earning potential and the lifestyle he had established, ensuring that his financial recklessness would not penalize his child. But she wasn't finished. The final, crushing blow landed with the force of a gavel. Given the evidence of willful concealment of assets, and the sworn testimony which now appears to be perjurious, I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office to investigate potential charges of criminal fraud and perjury against both Mr. Pierce and Miss Reynolds. A choked sob escaped from Zoe. The life she had schemed for, the future she had thought was secured, had just evaporated, replaced by the terrifying prospect of a criminal indictment. As they filed out, Charlotte walked a path that took her directly past Dominic. He looked up at her, his face ashen, his eyes hollowed out with the full realization of what he had lost. It wasn't just the money or the house. He had lost his past, his future, and any claim to the title of a good man. There was nothing left to say. There were no apologies that could bridge the chasm he had created. 2 months later, on a bright September morning, Charlotte gave birth to a perfectly healthy 7-pound baby girl. She named her Grace. Holding her tiny, warm daughter against her chest, the sterile smell of the hospital fading away to the sweet scent of new life, Charlotte understood the name was more than just a name. It was a reflection of the state she had finally found, a state of elegance, of peace, of unmerited favor after a period of profound suffering. This tiny child was the grace that had pulled her through the darkest days. News of Dominic and Zoe's downfall trickled in through the grapevine. Dominic was fired in a public and humiliating fashion, his firm unable to tolerate the stain of a criminal investigation. His reputation was shattered. The plea deal he eventually took left him with a criminal record that made a return to high finance impossible. Zoe, facing her own legal battles and public disgrace, broke things off. The last Charlotte heard from a mutual acquaintance, Zoe had sold her apartment and moved to California, seeking the anonymity of a new coast. Their grand romance, forged in lies, could not survive the harsh light of consequences. Charlotte didn't dwell on their fate. She was too busy building her own. A year after Grace's birth, she sold the Boston brownstone, an act that felt like closing the final chapter of a book she no longer needed to read. With the capital from the sale and her settlement, she bought a beautiful old sea captain's house in a quiet town on the North Shore. The air smelled of salt and freedom. She opened a small independent art gallery on the town's main street, focusing on emerging local artists. It wasn't a vanity project. It was her passion, reborn. Her new life was not the glossy, curated perfection she had once strived for. It was messy, real, and profoundly joyful. It was sandy feet on her hardwood floors, the vibrant chaos of finger paints, and the quiet evenings spent reading stories to her daughter, Grace's small head nestled in the crook of her arm. Some evenings, after Grace was asleep, Charlotte would walk down to the beach and watch the waves roll in under the moonlight. She had once believed a perfect life was an architectural achievement, a structure to be admired from the outside. She now knew it was the foundation beneath your feet, a foundation built not of wealth or status, but of resilience, truth, and the fierce, unyielding love for the child who had become her entire world. The storm had passed, and in its wake she had found not the wreckage of her old life, but the beautiful, open shoreline of a new one. Charlotte's story is a powerful testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of finding the light. She was pushed to the brink, her life dismantled by lies and cruelty, but she refused to be a victim. In the face of devastating betrayal, she found an inner strength she never knew she possessed, fighting not just for her assets, but for her dignity and the future of her child. Her journey reminds us that the most formidable weapon against arrogance and deceit is quiet, unshakable integrity. Justice may not always be loud, but when it arrives, its impact is absolute. If you were moved by Charlotte's incredible story of resilience and her ultimate triumph, please hit the like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas.